Hello. Oh,
Okay, shall we start now? Good afternoon in Thailand and good morning in the UK. My name is Dr. Nitisha Thamthanagun. I am the lecturer from the Department of Agricultural and Resources Economics. And also I am the Assistant to Dean for the Research and Social Development Faculty of Economics, Kasetsart University. And today I'm the moderator for today's seminar. Welcome to the introduction to the systematic review as a research tool seminar. And this seminar is part of the Thai-UK University Consortium. This consortium is aimed to build a partnership between the Thai University and UK University. And you will be hearing presentation from Dr. Iona on this really timely subject. But before we get started, I want to take you a few minutes of your time for the opening remarks. Okay, we can look at the agenda. Okay. First, I would like you to open remark by the Professor Ken Sloan, Vice Chancellor from Harper Adams University. We are very grateful for your time for today. And next is the open remark by our Dean, the Faculty of Economics, Assistant Professor Visit Lim Sumbunchai. And next, I will open the clip from the Assistant Professor Gopsak Wantongchai. He is the Dean of Faculty of Forestry. Unfortunately, he cannot attend today because he is in the field trip. Okay, and next move to the Professor Ken Sloan. Good morning in the UK, Professor Ken.
Good morning and good afternoon in Thailand, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Huang from Harper Adams University for arranging for me to be part of this session, and also for doing the work within our university in supporting the collaboration between our two institutions. I have to say that the only way that knowledge gets extended and developed is through collaboration. It's a massively important part of a healthy, vibrant university. And it's really important that universities reach beyond their national boundaries to speak to strong and good international partners. And that's why I'm hugely excited to see the relationship that's formed between these two universities. I've only been Vice Chancellor since November of last year. Previously, I was a Deputy Vice Chancellor at Monash University in Australia. So I was on your side of the equator for about 5 years. And prior to that, I did a semester at Tsinghua University. So I've worked in a number of different places. I also have to say on a personal note how delighted I am to see that we have got a relationship with institution in Thailand, because I've been a frequent visitor in education circles to Thailand over the last 20 years. And so I'm not a stranger to the country, and I hope on my next trip I'll be able to come to the university and see people and meet colleagues. But all I really wanted to say was thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to colleagues in terms of all of the effort that's gone into producing this review and today's seminar. And I wish everyone a very happy and successful event.
Thank you, Professor Ken Sloan. And also next, open remark by our Dean, Faculty of Economics. Okay, Professor Visit, please. Yeah.
Morning, Professor Ken Sloan, Harper Adams University Vice Chancellor, Professor Iona, and good afternoon, the faculty members, Kasetsart University, distinguished guests, and all the participants. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the online seminar on Introduction to Systematic Review and as a research tool today, which is organized by the Faculty of Forestry and the Faculty of Economics, Kasetsart University, and Food, Land, and Agribusiness Management Department, Harper Adams University. The seminar today is a part of the academic collaboration under Thai-UK World-Class University Consortium, which aim to support the advancement of quality teaching learning and research with the goal of improvement the university system through human capacity development and knowledge exchange with the UK. Previously, Kasetsart and Harper Adams University have collaborated on a research project entitled Sustainable Agribusiness Model for Poverty Reduction Among Thai Small-Scale Rubber Farmers, which is funded by British Council, the Newton Fund Project. The research is also applied the systematic review techniques. I would say that the research project is quite successful and have produced a systematic review on economic impact of rubber-based agroforestry, which could be published on a high-ranking journal. Therefore, I wish that today's seminar would help you to learn some new techniques and would help you to produce a new publication in your field area by using this technique. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Harper Adams University, Faculty of Forestry, and our speaker today, Professor Iona, and all the participants in the particular, as well as the organizing team for their excellent organizing this event and for allowing me to deliver the opening remarks at this seminar. I hope that this seminar could strengthen your research skill and your research capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Visit, Dean of Faculty of Economics. Okay, next, just stop sharing this first. I will open the clip from the Professor Kopsak, Dean of Faculty of Forestry.
Yeah, Dr. Huang from Harper Adams University.
Sorry, can you hear this? Okay, thank you.
And good afternoon on participants from Kasetsart University, Faculty of Forestry and Faculty of Economics. First of all, I would like to thank Harper Adams University that organized a very useful seminar today. Anyway, I cannot join this seminar for this afternoon because I have to go to field work on this week. So my apologize for not joining you today. Anyway, I think this seminar is very important and very useful for our students, in particular for our graduate students and also for our researchers, because I think systematic review is a very powerful research tool for research proposal preparation and also for research writing. For our students today, which I think that most of you are graduate students from master degree or PhD degree. Today is very good day for you that you have chance to learn about the systematic review. So I would like to suggest you that please take on advantage to learn about systematic review that you're gonna hear from now on. So coming back to KU and UK Consortium, which our faculty of Forestry, Kasetsart University, joined the consortium since last year. I think this consortium that we seek for the cooperation from England University which is very good because we hope that we can cooperate research project and also we can learn from your experience to improve our faculties and improve our capacity of our researchers in terms of the research project or in terms of academic. So we hope that in the future we can have more cooperation together in the future. So I think it's time for you that you can share your experience on research experience through the systematic review seminar for today. I cross my fingers for your success in this seminar for today. Thank you very much and enjoy the seminar today.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Gopsak, and also thank you, Dr. Krisadapan, who is the assistant to dean for the academic affair, and Dr. Krisadapan is the coordinator for this project too. Okay, next I will go to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Dr. Iona Huang. She graduated PhD from Staffordshire in the UK. And also now she is the senior lecturer at Food, Land and Agribusiness Management, Harper Adams University. She has experience on the public paper in related to the systematic review, such as the recent paper, like our paper, Economics Outcome of Rubber-Based Agroforestry System, a systematic review narrative synthesis. This is published in Agroforestry System, and also it's about food waste management. And this one is very popular if you search economics of robot and automation. It's really quite popular. The many people cite this paper. It's about economic of robot and automation in the field crop production. And welcome Dr. Iona.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Wisis for your very warm welcome, and thank you to Dr. Niticha and Dr. Krisadapan for your organization of this seminar. It is my great pleasure to work with you all, and so I'm here today really to share my experience of doing systematic review. And I worked with Niticha for quite a few years. And at Harper Adams University, we have a center of evidence-based agriculture. So there is actually a group of 10 researchers doing systematic review all sorts of subjects, particularly in agriculture, environment, and economics. So it would be great for us to work together in the future on more systematic reviews, but particularly I look forward to completing the project that we have set up with this Thai UK World Class University Consortium project. So please bear with me. I'm going to get my screen set up, share with you just a second. It was working. I hope it would work. Okay, yes. I have to share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. And before I actually go and start, so I just try to get the screen right, or perhaps I should, yeah, so that's fine. That's great. So you can see my screen properly. So the topic for today is Introduction to Systematic Review as a Research Tool. What we are going to look at today is to understand the concept of systematic review and we will have a look at different types of systematic reviews. And then we will go through the basic process of doing systematic review. In this process, I will show you some examples, particularly the reviews I personally have been involved. And please do feel free to ask for questions if you have any. And I think NIT teacher will help us to monitor the questions on the chat. Is that okay? So I would like to first of all ask you some questions. So if you go to menti.com and then you can type in this code 73199950. There are a few questions just really to help us understand your background in terms of reviews and systematic reviews. So I've got first question, what type of research review have you conducted so far? Is it a conventional literature review, mapping review, systematic review, meta-analysis, or meta-synthesis?
Iona, could you please copy link and put in the chat?
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes. If you bring the mouse, you will see the copy link. Yeah, this here.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Iona, you see the copy link? You will see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And put in the chat. Yeah, that will be.
Type the message there. That's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the participant, you can click the link from the chat box, and you will see the question. It's no right or wrong question, just answer this question. Thank you.
It's just for us to understand the background and see who might have already done systematic reviews. That's great. We have got colleagues who have already done meta-analysis and meta-synthesis. So please do share with us today your experience as we go along. Brilliant. Okay, so that's first question. And let me see, can I move? Yeah. And because of the experience we have already got, so the next question is to rate the level of comprehensiveness and transparency of systematic review articles and the normal literature review. And so from 0 to 10, where would you put a systematic review in terms of comprehensiveness and in terms of transparency and reproducibility?
And dear participant, you can use the same link and you will see the next questions.
Great, okay. So I think here we can see some more or less a kind of a consensus there that comprehensiveness of studies and also the transparency and the reproducibility. So we feel that systematic review may be ranked a bit higher. Yeah. So that is one of the reasons that we are looking at systematic review today. So thank you very much for completing the 2 questions, and then we will have some more exercises later. But first of all, I would like to introduce some key terms when we look at a systematic review. So the first is about review, and this is a very generic term which refers to the whole process of gathering information on a specific topic. And then the other term that we are going to use quite a lot is synthesis. So what do we mean by synthesis? So it is one stage in the review, is the later stage of the review, where we extract the information from the literature and compile them and compare and contrast the findings to identify the direction of the findings and the patterns. So when it comes to synthesis, there are different types of synthesis we may use. And one is narrative synthesis, where you tend to explore the findings in a very descriptive way, or rather than statistically. And the other one is to look at the meta-synthesis, which normally refers to bringing together qualitative data, qualitative finding. And the meta-analysis refers to the synthesis of the results. Normally, actually has to be quantitative method, so into a single quantitative estimate of effect. So for colleagues who have already done meta-analysis, you will know exactly what we mean. So these are the key terms to bear in mind for today. And then in terms of the actual systematic review, so it mainly started in actually a medical field, and started by Archie Cochrane, and who wrote a book about effectiveness and efficiency of healthcare in 1972. And when, in that book, he talked about the collective ignorance of the effects of healthcare. And so he realized actually some of the trials were not very helpful. And so it may lead to misunderstanding. And so it was there where he started to consider the development of systematic reviews to make the evidence more robust. And the network for systematic reviews were actually established in 1990s, I think starting from 1992, and then formally formulated the network. And this method has then, after that, has then been used in many other fields, including social sciences. So nowadays, I think you probably have already seen many articles using systematic review methods in management studies and in any other studies. And very often, for example, in the UK, the government body very often would call for a systematic review of evidence in order to gather information to inform the policy making. So it is becoming more and more popular as a method of research. So what is a systematic review? Here is a very simple definition, but it shows the fundamental difference between systematic review and a conventional review that we just did the exercise, because it uses a systematic and explicit method to locate, identify, select, and appraise the primary research evidence. and analyze and extract and analyze and synthesize the findings. So the fundamental difference between systematic review and a conventional literature review is about the rigor, is about the process which can be reproducible. So anybody reading a systematic review paper would be able to, if they want to, reproduce that process, then they can do that. And when they do that, it is we can be very confident that the outcomes will be the same. Yeah. Whilst if we do our conventional review, and that is different, which I will show you a quote later. So, so systematic review, the main benefit is to reduce the bias in terms of the selection of literature and also the publication bias, because when we do the systematic review of evidence, we normally would recommend that we don't just look at the peer-reviewed journal articles. If there are other grey literature that we can look at, we should always look at as well. So that then will reduce the publication bias, because sometimes journal articles, some journals tend to favor papers with significant findings, whilst very often in reality, research findings may not have that level of significance. So non-significant research findings sometimes may go to conference papers, but may not be published in journal articles. Selection bias. So if you do the literature review, as we just considered earlier, it is very difficult for us to know your criteria for the literature selection and how much literature you have covered. Have you covered 20%, 30%, 30, 50%, etc. So therefore, that this is really the beauty of the systematic reviews. It can reduce that bias. It enables the reader to understand each steps of the decision making. So I don't know whether you have heard this or read about the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Has anybody? Yeah. Do you know the story? Yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. So the story was about six blind men. Once they lived in a town in India, and they thought they were all very clever. And so therefore, one day an elephant came into the town, and the blind man did not know what an elephant looked like. But they could feel. And so therefore, the first person would touch the elephant's body, and it felt really hard and big and wide. And so the man said, "Oh, an elephant is like a wall." And then another one said, touched the elephant's tusks, and then it felt smooth and hard and sharp. And so this, he said, "Oh, an elephant is like a spear." And the third one touched the elephant's trunk. It felt long and thin and wiggly. And he said, "An elephant is like a snake." The fourth one touched one of the legs, and it felt thick and rough and hard and round. And he said, "An elephant is like a tree." So, and so on. So the fifth man said, "An elephant is like a fan," because he touched the elephant's ear. And the sixth man touched the elephant's tail and said, "It looks like a rope," because it was long and thin and strong. Yeah. So why do we have this story here, you think? How does this relate to the systematic review?
Yeah, I think we have heard about this story. It's like the traditional story. I think it's about, if we look at to one side of the elephant, that we thought this is a wall, this is a tree. But if we do the systematic review, that we can look at the whole elephant. I'm not sure about this, Iona.
No, I think you are absolutely right. So it is about each one person is only empirically informed based on their own perspective, isn't it? And so if they do, they look at only one side of the story, and it is sometimes it may be accurate, but sometimes it may be a complete distortion of the fact. So, so when it comes to the research, if we do one piece of research, we use only one method, and the findings from that one method may be true and may not be true. Yeah. So this is one reason for us to consider synthesizing the findings in order to understand whether it is true or not. And so that is one part of the reason for doing systematic review. But compared to also to the conventional literature review, it's the same, isn't it? When we do the conventional literature review, again, we are limited to our own judgment and our own perspective. So when you choose literature to review, you are still not very sure whether the body of the literature represents the body of the field. Yeah. So that is the reason for us to consider conducting the systematic review. So I like this quote from Pettigrew and Roberts. It is a really very good, very useful book for social sciences, particularly about systematic review. And so it talked about literature reviews, conventional, can be made to tell any story one wants them to, and the failure by literature reviewers to apply scientific principles to the process of reviewing the evidence can lead to biased conclusions, and then therefore it would be a wasted time and resources. So it is this aspect which made systematic review stronger than normal literature review, right? But we do also have criticism, which we can talk about later, about the systematic review, yeah. So in terms of the strengths of the research evidence, I got another question for you. This is, so please rank the strengths of evidence of the types of research. So if we have got meta-analysis of randomized control trials, we also have systematic review of randomized control trials, and then actual randomized control trials, opinions, cross-sectional surveys, which tend to be used a lot by social scientists, and then case control studies. So how would you rate the level of evidence, the strength of the level? That's pretty good. Okay, any more coming? We got a 16 so far. Okay, so here I think we are pretty close. So got a systematic review of randomized control trials as has got the strongest level of evidence, and then meta-analysis, and then randomized control trial. And this one may be up to debate, and some people would say case control studies has got a stronger evidence than cross-sectional surveys. And so apart from that, I think actually, yeah, so we are quite in agreement with each other. So here is my my list. So as you can see, systematic review it depends. Sometimes we got a systematic review of randomized control trials, but we may also have systematic review of other studies. So if there are other studies, and if we got a synthesis of other studies rather than that, in general, we would say probably randomized controlled trials are actually has got stronger evidence. Actually, remember we talked about Archie Cochrane, and it was him who actually pioneered this method of research. It's good. So it just shows how useful systematic review can be and to help us to gather evidence. And that is why, particularly in the UK, evidence-based policy making has become a really big thing in this century. And so there are lots of policy making units want to see a comprehensive body of evidence. So therefore there are calls for systematic reviews every year. And different types of reviews. So that's the next one I would like to, so even if we look at a systematic review here, as you can see, so we do not always say every review that we can do can be systematic, and it really, there are many variants. And so conventional, which is what we call it, literature review, but then there are rapid review, which normally takes about like 5 or 6 weeks to complete. And scoping review can be very quick, a few weeks. Recently, I did a scoping review of measurements of food loss and food waste for International Standard Organization, ISO, because I am a committee member for the ISO's development of food loss and food waste standard. So we are currently considering the body of literature. And so I just did a very quick scoping review to look at how big the body of literature is. And so basically it's mapping out how many articles or how many titles, how many research reports are out there that we could rely on when we consider, for example, the definitions, when we consider the measurement, etc. So that's that. And the mapping review is a slightly more complicated than scoping review, but it still is about mapping out a body of literature, as well as probably very often also the findings of the literature without going into the critical appraisal of the findings. So systematic review, so these are the two we are going to have a look in more details. Umbrella review, I don't know whether anybody has heard of that. Because there are so many reviews already, there are so many literature reviews or systematic reviews. So umbrella review is basically a review of systematic review. So sometimes someone may have done a systematic review on item A, and then there is another item B, which are closely related to item A, and somebody else done that. So therefore, you could actually do an umbrella review to bring the two systematic reviews together. And there is another type of review which you can call it a live systematic review or living systematic review. So that means you continuously update your systematic review. So that's another one. Meta-analysis, mainly based on quantitative data, qualitative synthesis. Obviously, it is mainly based on qualitative data, but actually qualitative synthesis could also be based on quantitative data, but it's not suitable for meta-analysis. And mixed methods review. Okay, so there are so many different types of reviews that we could consider. Depends on what your purposes are, and also other things that we will talk about later. So we're going to particularly focus on mapping reviews and the systematic reviews because these two are very much closely related. But I would always see systematic review or the mapping review as the first stage of any systematic review. And if you want to do that, you have to first of all understand what research has been done in the field before you try to find out what is known from what has been done, or basically to synthesize the findings from what has been done. So by doing the first stage of the mapping review, that will help you to make a decision to the second stage, whether you are able to do, for example, whether you are able to do a meta-analysis or meta-synthesis, or just normal narrative synthesis. Yeah. So in terms of the systematic maps, it is about understanding what research has been done. So what it can do is it can help us to understand who has done what research in what context, using what methods. And it is particularly good for, when I now consider supervising PhD studies, I would like the students to, at least to consider doing a mapping review, because then that will help you to really understand the field and then identify the gap of evidence. So that will be really important stage for any PhD studies, because I think, probably from our own experience of doing PhD without doing the systematic maps, sometimes after 1 year or even after 2 years, you say to yourself, oh, I wish I had seen that article. Have you had that experience? Yeah, so you would say, oh, I wish I had seen that. I wish I had considered that. But if we had done a systematic map right at the beginning, then all you need is over the next 3 years, you just need to update, and then you won't regret for not seeing any particular papers. So this is the thing I would strongly recommend any researchers, early researchers, do at the start of any research project. So the way that we synthesize the research for systematic map is very much configurative. So we are mapping the distribution of the primary studies and just really to identify the trends, the key trends of the studies. Systematic review is based on systematic map, as we just said, but it can take us further to the actual findings of the primary studies. So therefore, it is not just about what is known from what has been, not just about what has been researched, it's actually about what the findings are, so what is known. So sometimes you may find when you conduct a systematic review, the research question may be slightly different, actually has to be more focused and more specific, because you need to be able to identify the body of literature which has answered the same question in order for you to synthesize the findings. So it is that part which made it more specific, so the question is more focused. So when we answer that specific focused question, we try to ask, what is the impact of any intervention, or what is the impact of any particular exposure, exposure to risk or exposure to any disaster, for example, exposure to COVID, or if there is any intervention, for example, wearing masks. So what's the impact of wearing masks in reducing the transmission of COVID? And so that is that. And does it work, or how well does it work? So what is the strength if you say it is effective? How effective is it? And then draw an overall conclusion. So when it comes to systematic review, in comparison with the mapping review, you can see we first of all, this stage one is to do configurative mapping to understand the field, the type of methods used. So the same question may be answered by different authors using different methods. For example, some people may use randomized control trials for mask wearing, and some may just use case control, and some may just use survey, cross-sectional survey. So therefore, those would be different methods. And then you may also have other dimensions for you to group the findings or the studies. It could be in what countries, for example, in countries which had SARS previously, and then compared to countries which had no SARS. So you could see mask wearing behavior, which may be different. Okay, so that is configurative. But when it comes to actually answering the question is, what is the impact, or what is the level of effectiveness? Then it goes to the next level. It is more aggregative. So we are combining the findings and the outcomes of those primary studies. So this is about what studies have been done, and this is more about what the findings are. I'm showing you a statistical quantitative way of aggregation. So this is a very conventional meta-analysis forest plot. So you look at the aggregative effect size of different studies, yeah, and so you can see the overall, in the end, you get an overall effect size of mask wearing or hand washing, or etc. So this is just a kind of quantitative representation of aggregative synthesis. But we also have qualitative synthesis, or we can say there are some integrative synthesis, which may combine quantitative and qualitative, because it's very, very possible when you look at the body of the literature, that body of literature may have used the method, may have got the findings which are very much suitable for meta-analysis, whilst another body of literature may use just qualitative interviews, or that one may have only used observation, and so therefore they don't have quantitative data, but you can still try to aggregate the findings by doing qualitative synthesis. So in the end, you combine both quantitative and qualitative together, but some people may only focus on one method, say quantitative, whilst the others may only focus on qualitative. But in general, these are the two main types of reviews. So that's what we just talked about, is the types of data synthesis. If we have got quantitative data suitable for qualitative analysis, then I would always say, if they are suitable, then it is always good for you to use meta-analysis. And if you do that, then you have to consider a weighting, and because not every finding, not every study is equal. So the methods used may be more reliable or may be less reliable, and the sample size, etc., etc. So you need to have a set of criteria to do the weighting before you actually conduct the meta-analysis. So that is a purely quantitative method. Another one is a qualitative method, which may involve quantitative, so even studies, cross-sectional quantitative studies, but they just have not got the means or the sample size for the subsamples, and but you have got findings on positive, negative, and so in that case you do vote counting, how many provided a positive or how many provided a negative outcome, etc. And very often it's good for you, particularly if it's qualitative interviews and you are going to do qualitative synthesis, it's very important for you to actually come up with a criteria for you to regroup, or we call it a thematic synthesis. So when you do the thematic synthesis and how you group them, what is the criteria for you to group and grade them? And so it would be good actually to have a group of specialists working together. So these are the main types of reviews, systematic reviews. I just want to just mention a little bit more on meta-analysis, because very often colleagues, when we talk about doing a systematic review, and colleagues will say, let's do a meta-analysis, yeah? And there was, why don't we do a meta-analysis? Because everybody felt doing a meta-analysis is very rigorous. It gives you a really very clear indicator of the level of effect. So it is normally a really, a preferred option, but sometimes it's just not possible, right? So when it is not possible to do a meta-analysis, if the primary studies is qualitative in nature, then you can't do that anyway. And sometimes you come up with a literature, a review question, which may be too broad, but actually you need to look at a broad field. In that situation, when, and then the questions or the body of literature you are reviewing, they are not addressing an identical conceptual hypothesis. That's another one. And because, for example, measurement. So risk, what do we mean by risk? It may be different. So if people has got a different conceptual background in a particular field, then it is difficult for you to actually consider using meta-analysis, because they need to be more or less the same. They have used very much the same measurement. Otherwise, you are comparing chalk and cheese. Yeah. And if it's too broad, it's difficult, but then there is also a possibility for you to do a meta-analysis within the systematic review. So that means, as we said earlier, you could do part of it as qualitative synthesis, another part could be a meta-analysis. I have read quite a number of articles which have used that method. So measurement is really the key, particularly I think for medical science it's much easier. For example, if you are considering the effectiveness of mask wearing, and so you say N95 or whatever, you can specify which type of mask, so that is more or less like a measurement. Another type is medicine. So if you say we are going to apply this particular medicine, and so that medicine is the same. So therefore, that is why it is particularly suitable for medical science when it comes to the trials. and synthesizing the effect. So you just apply to different population, and then you will be able to get an aggregated result. So, but if the measurements are different, if you use a different method, or for example, different medicine, then you just can't do it. Yeah. So just really be careful on that. And so the other, the next step is for us to ask ourselves, in that case, then which review is appropriate for us to use? So we got so many scoping reviews, mapping review, systematic review, or meta-synthesis. So I would say, have a look at, think about your audience, think about the purpose, and also think about the resources, the database, the type of data that you want. And then it also depends on how focused the research question is and at what time you have got available. So all of those are the key criteria when it comes to making a decision on what type of reviews that you are going to use. Just give you a kind of indication of the time. For example, we mentioned earlier, a rapid review can take about 1 month or 3 months. So for example, DEFRA, the UK government for the agriculture and forestry, very often they tend to announce calls for rapid reviews. And so that would normally last 3 months. Scoping reviews can be also very short, as I said earlier, 5 weeks or 3 months. But a conventional systematic review, I would normally give at least 7 months. Yeah. So if you are able to have, spend 7 months, particularly if you have got a group of reviewers working together, then that would be appropriate for you to do a proper systematic review. So at the end of the day, it's really about your judgment based on your situation, on the resources you have got, on the time you have got, on the number of reviewers you've got, and also what is the purpose. And sometimes it's about whether you, for example, whether you want to look at grey literature or whether you want to only focus on the peer-reviewed papers, etc. For those who are interested in looking at that decision-making, and this is the link, which is quite good. So that would give you the full process of assessing which tool of systematic review that you would use. So it's quite a useful document for you to have a look later. Any questions so far?
Hi, Iona.
Yeah.
It is possible that you can share your PowerPoint slide?
Yes, I will share that later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So if no questions, then I'm going to go to the next stage, is to actually look at the actual process of doing systematic review. So here, as you can see, I've got actually 2 types of reviews combined in this diagram. I mentioned earlier, so mapping review would normally be the first step of a conventional systematic review. So here, starting from forming a review team, so that means the reviewers. If you are able to identify people who would like to work together, and I always believe it's better to have more reviewers than less reviewers, and at least you should have 2. And then if you have more, it would be better. So once you've got the review teams, and then you need to together work out the review question, the conceptual framework, and decide on the criteria of inclusion and exclusion, which is what we normally say, developing a protocol, a systematic review protocol. So in the protocol, you have to articulate all of this, and to establish that is what we mentioned earlier when we said why systematic review is good, and there are two things there. One is about transparency, and one is about reproducibility. So this protocol is to help you to establish that level of transparency and rigor and reproducibility. So whoever's going to replicate what you are doing, then they can just follow your protocol and they can come up with the same outcome. So that is the purpose of doing that. But of course, then for the protocol is really for you to use that as a guideline for you to conduct the review so that you follow that process. I am very flexible in a way, because when we do the protocol at the beginning, we may have missed a certain literature because you are only doing sample searches or what we call the scoping searches. And sometimes you may have missed important keywords or important concepts. So sometimes even after we have come to this stage, we have to go back and revise the protocol again and redo a search. And so we have, for the 3 papers we've done, we published so far, I think we have actually, for each one of them, we have done that. It's because later on you may realize actually there was one key element missing when you read the articles which you just didn't see before, and you said, okay, that is a word we may have to go back and see. So what you do is you can actually complement whatever you have done before just by doing additional searches, and then combine that additional search to your original search outcomes, and then of course go through the same process. And in the end, when you write up, you just add that additional, but make sure that additional, by adding that additional term, then you have already also combined the outcomes and revised the whole process. So whoever's going to use that protocol that you in the end publish, that means they don't have to go through that painful process that you went through, and they were able to use that complete search string, just as an example. So, so that is really a key. So I would normally spend like 2 or 3 months to develop a protocol before we actually do the systematic review. So something that I would strongly recommend that you put lots of effort into that, and the more effort you put into protocol, then the easier later, basically. And then you do the search, and then you started to do the screening. And once you have screened and identified the streams of research, then that's the time you started to go to the next stage, which is what we call it a synthesis. Now, if you do a systematic map, what you may do is you may just get to that stage where you say positive outcome or negative outcome or neutral or no findings. And then that's it. That's the end of that map. But if you are doing a full systematic review, you need to go to the next stages, which is to, first of all, to assess the study quality, and then to extract the data and to do the proper synthesis of the findings, and then of course communication and writing of your report would apply to both map and synthesis. So that's the full process of systematic review. And there are some techniques that you can rely on when you formulate the research question. So I tend to use either of these two. And one is what we call it the PICO questions. So for the PICO, so it's a population, and think about, you know, your research question in terms of the 4 components. So does your research question have a population? Does it have an intervention or exposure? Does it have a comparator? So what is a comparator? So in comparison with intervention. So that means comparator means without intervention or without exposure. And then the outcome, does it have the outcome? So if that question, your review question has got those 4 components, then we call it a PICO question. Not every question has got those 4 outcomes. Sometimes, particularly for a mapping review, you may not consider outcomes, you may not consider comparators, or you may not consider you know, exposures, whatever. So it depends on, and you may just do what happened. So if you just want to know what happened to whom, and so that is occurrence and the population. So what happened to whom? And so that's what we call it a poll question. So it's possible that you just use 2 components, or you can use 4 components. Sometimes you may not have comparator, and then that would be as just PIO. Yeah, so that's also possible. So if you can think or break down your questions into those elements, it will be easier for you to articulate. So this is just one example, one of the papers reviews we did on economic impacts of robots and automation in field crop production. So you can see here that we have got a population, which is the field crop production, and then intervention would be the robotic or automation production. So they implemented in the field crop. So this would be the intervention. And then comparators would be field crop production without using robots or automation. And so that would be the comparison. That means without that intervention. And outcomes, that would be the economic outcomes. So economic impact could be direct or indirect. So that is the thing that you need to, as a reviewer, then you need to consider your criteria. So when you look at economic impacts, are you looking at direct economic impact, or are you going to include both direct and indirect impact? So for us, we considered both direct and indirect, or just direct. And so what do you mean by economic impact? So that's another level of consideration. 2 more example questions here. So I want to ask you. So one is, what are the economic outcomes of rubber agroforestry systems in comparison with monoculture rubber farming? And the other one, what food waste management practices have been adopted by retailers? Which one is a PICO? Which one is a PO? Good question.
Any idea, Dr. Krisadapan? I hope you are a good participant.
For myself, I think the first one is PICO. Maybe, yes. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, now that's great. So which one is a population?
Population is rubber agroforestry system, maybe.
It is a little bit tricky, isn't it? Yeah. So because we got rubber agroforestry, and also we got a monoculture rubber farming. So it is basically is a rubber farming. Yeah. So that is the population, right? And so rubber farming is a population, but then there are 2 types of rubber farming. One is agroforestry systems, one is monoculture. Yeah. So in that case, which one is the intervention? Which one is comparator?
Okay, Dr. Niticha, could you help me?
Now, which one first?
So which one is intervention? Which one is comparator? So agroforestry or monoculture?
Actually, I forgot about it. Monoculture rubber farming is we would like to compare between the agroforestry and monoculture. That is PIC. That is C. Is the slide?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's right. So therefore, this is the comparator because we are looking at the effect of the intervention. So we are looking at the outcomes of the intervention, which is the agroforestry. So for that reason, monoculture is the comparator. Yeah. So, and then that is O, so economic outcomes, then that is the outcome. So therefore we got population. So we got population and we got intervention, comparator, and outcome. So this is a very typical PICO question. Now this one, so therefore it would be a PO review, right? So which one is population?
Anyone want to answer? And how about Mr. Kun Turanin? Yes, you answer the second one or from the previous question. Do you want to participate in this question? Okay, that's okay. Okay, let me try.
Okay. Okay, you try?
Yeah.
Which one is population? Which one is occurrence?
And Mr. Turanin, what do you think the retailer is the P, population, or the occurrence? P or O? P. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
P,
Retailers. Yeah. So here, because it's about population in this situation would be the, you know, the body where, you know, as we said, intervention or whatever the practice is being used. And then, so that would be in this situation is retailers. So that is the population, whilst the occurrence is what has happened. So what has happened here is about what food management practices have been adopted. So this is the occurrence. So this is a very typical PO review. And because of this PO review, is this question suitable as a systematic review, or is it more suitable as a mapping review?
And I think the PO is suitable for mapping review. Right? What food waste management practice have been adopted by retailer?
Yeah, so absolutely, you're absolutely right. So this is a very typical mapping review question because we are not really looking at how effective, what the impacts are. You know, we are only looking at what has happened. Yeah. So what has happened in this situation means what has been adopted, what practices have been used. So it is a very typical mapping review. Okay, so next one, I'm going to give you some exercises again. So just really think about your own research area and see whether you can write a research question of your own interest. And then when you write that and then specify, you could either specify a PICO, so population intervention or exposure and comparator and outcome, or a PO component, so that means population and occurrence. So just write one question and then highlight or indicate P or I or C or O. Yeah. So I'm going to again show you on the Mentimeter so that you can write your question for us to see.
Hi, Iona. The PI, sorry, the Kuntanakan, PICO is an element that we have to define to do the systematic review. Iona, could you please open the slide PICO again?
Yes, yes. I'm going to, let me see whether I can move that slide. Yeah. So when I specified that is, you could probably just write a P. So it's a unit of study, it's a population, people, or whatever, intervention. Nitija, do we want to have a few minutes break after this, or do you want to continue?
How it depends on you.
I just wondered whether everyone feels it's too much without break, or
And how many slides you have left about?
So the next part is, once we have gone through this, is then about searching and then screening and synthesizing.
Yeah, and I think it's also difficult for us if we don't know systematic review before, if we can define which one is the P, I, C, O. I think maybe we can continue until the end of the session, and after that we can have the Q&A. What do you think?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, because it's also difficult if we can want to focus only 5 minutes to write PICO.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's fine. It's so, but this is just an exercise. It's just to get you started thinking in a systematic review way, basically. So just really give you a kind of a test at this stage, just a flavor of what. So we haven't got, have we got anything? Nobody has written anything. Okay, so it doesn't matter. As I said, I wanted to use this as just as an exercise to get you started. But it would be good when you think about your review question, then think about the components. What is the unit of study, and that is the population, and then what is the intervention or exposure? Ask those questions will help you to crystallize your research question. So that is the key. Okay, let me go back. So no problem, just keep that in mind, for your own purpose. So we talked about the review process, and then the next part is really about, once you have formulated a proper research question, the next stage is for you to develop the protocol. So for the protocol, normally we would require the protocol to include this type of contents, provide some background, and specify the scope of the map or the review. I put it as a map as because right from the beginning, you know, you basically start with a map, and then once you've mapped the body of study, then in the end you may decide you're going to the next stage of review. And then very specific research question and the conceptual framework, search strategy, screening, so selection of the studies, inclusion and exclusion, and then coding. So that is extracting the information, the findings, and then how you are going to present. And then make sure that you pay attention to your review management and quality assurance process. And so that particularly for systematic review papers, if you are going to publish a paper, the scrutiny by the reviewers of the journals are very, very high. So they wanted to make sure that you have, because you claim that you have done systematic review, so therefore they expect that you have got a very, very rigorous process of quality assurance. So that's once you've done that protocol, then the next part is for you to start doing the actual review. So that starting from search. So you are going to search for the literature, capture the literature. And search strategy is actually really important. Again, there is a decision-making stage because it's about how much you want to capture, how it depends on how much time you have got. And it's about, you know, remember we talked about publication bias, so, and then selection bias. So the two things there, are you going to consider grey literature? And also, are you going to consider what type of databases? Because we are limited, for example, at Harper, we don't have Scopus. And so very often, if I need somebody to do a search on Scopus, I send, for example, I send my search string to NeTeacher, and who can help me to search. So that's something that you could do, that when you form an international team, a collaborative team, then you can actually pull the resources together, right? So if you have got Scopus and we have got Web of Science and somebody else has got Springer Nature, then together we have 3 databases, yeah. But if I do it only with colleagues at Harper, then we don't have Scopus, yeah. So that's the beauty of that. And in terms of the search strategy, so we're talking about where to search, and then the key thing, next part is really about your search terms and how you combine. And so there are some basic principles. We tend to do lots of scoping searches in order to understand the comprehensiveness of the search, or we say inclusiveness. So where to search, database choices. It's always good to consider using databases which tend to complement each other. For example, Science Direct and Scopus. If we have Scopus, then I normally would say then we probably don't need to use Science Direct, because these two would overlap nearly completely. Science Direct is part of Scopus, whilst Scopus and the Web of Science, and then they overlap probably 40% by 40%, or sometimes even less. And so for that reason, it is important that you actually consider both Web of Science and Scopus. So those are the things you need to consider. In terms of the grey literature, there are certain organizations, international organizations, particularly for agriculture, for example, FAO. It is a really good source. But for economics, for example, OECD has got lots of the economic indicators, World Bank. So for international trade, then you can also consider, WTO and World Bank, OECD, and sometimes there are some government databases. EU has got their databases, etc. And you can also consider whether you are going to use a PhD thesis. And very often I would say PhD theses are really worth considering, but master's thesis may not be. So I would normally exclude master's thesis, but PhD thesis, I would consider that. And sometimes, no matter how comprehensive you are, you may still be able to capture some new literature by actually going to Google Scholar. It is very, very good. So that's another one. But the only downside of Google Scholar is the search function, the combination of search function is not as good as normal academic databases. And so that is the downside. But I would use that just really to test, just in case I might have missed anything. And so those are the grey literature. But you may also consider grey literature, for example, newspapers, technical notes. Do you need those or do you not? It depends. So one of the papers we published, which is about a food waste management by retailers, we actually used lots of grey literature, but it is like a Farmer's Weekly, a little bit like a professional magazines for the industry. But it's because they would report lots of retailers or convenience store, for example. So convenience store, they report what retailers are doing to control the food waste. And for that reason, we decided to include. But if you are actually seriously considering the systematic review of the research findings, then I would not recommend them, because those magazines would not give you a rigorous account of research methods they've used. So therefore, their findings, if they do have findings, you don't really know how reliable their findings are, because they may be very biased to the sector. They may do a survey, but they do the survey for the purpose of promoting for the industry. Yeah. So therefore, I would then only go for peer-reviewed. PhD thesis is peer-reviewed anyway. So therefore, PhD thesis and then other academic studies. So that's that. And then in terms of developing the search terms, the reason that I recommended using the PICO element for formulating your research question is also related to here, to actually coming when it comes to developing the search terms. You could consider what terms you are going to use for the unit of study, and or for the intervention, or for the outcome, or for the comparator. Apart from that, you could add more limiters, location or study type. And particularly if you are only interested in modeling, you may then decide adding some limiters to modeling. Yeah. So search string, I'm going to actually give you, before we talk about that, and I want to show you some limiters or or expanders. So there are words here we use. One is called and. And so if you use and, in general, in the common sense, we use and for combining ideas. Do you think it would restrict or it would expand the outcomes of your research? Make it more or make it less? So this is a little bit counterintuitive, and normally our conventional wisdom would say end is to combine, so therefore it should add more. But actually for the search, when it comes to the search, when you add an end, you are limiting. So you are actually making it less. For example, if you just say food, you are going to get millions or billions of hits. But if you add waste, food and waste, then that will take it to thousands. Yeah. So because it means the article has to have both food and waste in that article for it to be to be eligible to your search. So that's why it is a limiter. Another limiter is by using quotation marks. So if I put food and waste, so food and waste, that means food and waste can be anywhere. So I could say food and food supply, producing food, food production, and somewhere it will say, plastic waste. But if those two terms appear in the same article, that would be picked up. But then if it's about plastic waste, it's actually not about food waste, is it? So for that reason, then if I just say food and waste, it will still be too much, yeah, and unnecessary. If it's a plastic waste. So for that reason, then I would put a food waste together as a phrase. So by putting food waste together as a phrase, then it means only an article which has got the phrase food waste together will be picked up. So in that case, it may reduce from say 10,000 or even 20,000 to 8,000. That's very possible, yeah. Another one is or. So or is for synonyms. So if I only search for food waste, what if some articles which talked about food loss, yeah, or surplus food? So do I need them? Or wasted food? So for that reason, then I could actually add those all so to expand. So I'm going to then expand from food waste as a phrase, expand to also include a food loss as a phrase, and a wasted food as a phrase. So for that one, then I will then get a bit more. Probably I will get about 12,000. Yeah. Sometimes you may have variations, like American spelling and the British spelling, and sometimes it could be plurals, or for example, if you say, revolution, for example, revolution, you've got, revolutionary and revolutionary. Automation, automating, automated, etc. So you could consider just using a wildcard sign to look for the root of that word and plus that sign, then you can get the variations. But if you actually want to exclude something, then you can use not. So these are the combinations of the search string. These are really, really important, very, very important, critical to developing the search string. So I will show you an example here. So this is the example about the economic outcomes of crop production using robots or automation. So this is the robots. So that's the intervention, right? So intervention robots, we use robot, then using that wildcard sign. And so that means robot, robots, robotics, robotic. So all of those would come by using this sign. But then we have got automatic, automated, automation. You may ask, why didn't we also use that wildcard sign? why do we use automatic, automated, and automation? Because it's possible we could just use a, add that asterisk sign after T, isn't it? Why didn't we use that? So what we did was we did a test. We found if we use that, that would include another word, which is called automatically. Automatically can be used in so many different contexts. So in the end, you really get a huge amount when you say automatically. So we say we don't want it automatically. So we just use this automatic, automated, and automation in combination with those would be fine. So that's the reason that we used that. And again, here you can look at economic outcomes. So we use the economic, so why did we use that? And profit and finance and cost. So this is what we said. We actually provided an explanation, because when you look at economic outcomes, you are likely to look at a cost-benefit analysis, cost effectiveness analysis, etc. So the reason that we then didn't use those phrases is because that cost, by using cost and the asterisk, then basically that covered all of those items. Yeah, and the same here, finance, financial, yeah, financing, etc. Profit, profitable, yeah, profitability, etc. And and then the population. So this part, we actually thought quite carefully about how we design the population in terms of the open field crops. So agriculture, we originally just used the agri, field, and crop, and those. And then, but then we realized that sometimes there are articles which talk about asparagus harvesters. And then they don't use agri, they don't use field, they don't use crop, but they directly use asparagus, apple, fruit, etc. So for that reason, we in the end decided, by reading, knowing which type of crops tend to use automation, then we just added all of those crops there. So that's how we came up with this. But for some other articles, for example, the food waste article, so we did in a very different way. So I will show you this article here. So the food waste search, you can see our search string here is fairly simple. So we got population is retail. So retail, we've got retail, retailer, supermarket, supermarkets, store, etc. So you can see all of those are the variants. So these are the variations of retailer. Tried to think of anything that we could use. And then the rest would be, so this part would be the food waste. So you can see why we didn't use the food and waste, but actually we used the phrases. But by just using that phrase, we feel may not be sufficient. So because there will be other expressions, as you can see here, and we also added wasted food there. So this all demonstrates why, sometimes you need to use lots of alternatives, but other times you have to use limiters, but sometimes you need to use those wildcard for variations. So just some examples to show you. Yeah. Okay. There is a choice when it comes to the search string. the choice is about how much you want to include. So it's always good for you to have very inclusive search phrase. So that means you capture as many as you can, so that to make sure you don't miss anything. So if that's the body, you capture that whole body. So that means you will be very sure you won't have missed anything. So that is about sensitivity. But sometimes you may not have the time. You know, for example, recently I'm doing another review with 4 researchers in Colombia. We captured 35,000 titles. That's a huge amount, isn't it? And so do we have time? Now, the reason we decided to go with that is because we are actually using AI, artificial intelligence, to help us to do the screening. So the AI we manually screened about like 10,000, and then using the AI to help us to do the rest. And so that's amazing, really. So if you can afford that, if you know how to use the AI, train the AI, then that is an ideal situation. But even that, you know, the AI is not 100% accurate. So what we do is we have done 3 or 4, 4 times trainings on AI, and then quality control. That means you check on the exclusions of AI, and then all the inclusions you then manually check. So that's what we do. So if you don't have enough time, you don't have enough people, what do? You may do a more focused, more specific search. So you are likely to miss something, but you capture the majority of that literature, that body. So, but as long as you specify, you are transparent. You say, for example, we don't use, you say we only use the Web of Science and the Scopus. We did not use Springer Nature. You can say that. And then, so it is possible if there are some overlaps, something which do not overlap between Springer Nature, Web of Science, and Scopus, then you are likely to miss that body. But you are transparent. You told the readers that you have not included that body. So being transparent is the key, okay? So once you've done that, then it's also about try and error. And so we tend to do many versions. So this is what we call it recording the scoping searches. We will record, we will say database, Web of Science, search term, date, number of articles, and then are there any limiters? So we tend to record this, and Nitija would know that when we did the first paper on the agroforestry, rubber farming, we did many versions of the search before we came up with the final version. Currently, we are developing a new search string for the environmental impact. So spend some time on this one is very important, actually. So this is an example of what we did. So we did the search string on on various databases, but also on same database, you would do that, so record the days, record the number of hits, and make notes of what exclusion criteria or limiters that you have used, etc. So that would help. And once you've done that, then the next part is where do you capture, where do you store your captured literature? So I would always recommend using reference manager. So I use EndNote. I found that most useful. But for students particularly, they don't want to pay, and the university using RefWorks. RefWorks doesn't have desktop version. That means it's actually difficult to manage. So I then tend to recommend using Mendeley or Zotero, because Mendeley or Zotero both are free, and then they both have got desktop version. So make sure that you use desktop version. Then for each search, I tend to put them into a separate folder. So in order, later on, when we do the duplicates check, I will be able to find out how many were taken out from which. It's really for my own purpose. I wanted to compare the overlaps between the databases. So when I want to do that, so by doing it this way, I will be able to see how many were taken out from each database.
Hi, Iona. There's
Yeah.
a question like, how is number of hits important? Quality of article? Or
Sorry, what's
the question from the chat? How is number of hits important?
Oh, so
And
this
the
number of
quality
hits.
articles? Yeah.
Yeah. This is not really important. It's it depends on how reasonable, how sound your search string is. Yeah. So from my point of view, sometimes you may get a huge number. For example, as I said, the one that we have got recently is really a huge number from Scopus. But 7,000 from Web of Science, which is normal. 7,000 from Web of Science is quite normal, actually. But on the other hand, you may not get that many, for example, because we are so focused here on retail food waste management, we are not looking at anything else. We're not looking at on the farm or in the processors or in the household consumers. For that reason, so we really limited to just retailers for that. So that's why it's quite low. But that is the number of hits itself is not a quality indicator. I think the quality indicator is in the search term, because when the reviewers review your paper, they don't care about that one. What they care about is this one. They will say, oh, they will read, for example, one reviewer asked us, why didn't you use glean? Glean means going to get the, pick the food not harvested in the field. So if people, if farmers decided not to harvest part of the field, and then they will just leave the food to rot in the field, and then there are people who will go and glean, and so they collect the food and then take them back. So that is food gleaning. And so the reviewer asked us, why didn't you use food gleaning? That is still about food waste. So we actually did, and we found there is really, if you combine those and with food gleaning, and very often they would have already been picked up either by food loss or food surplus or food bank. So there was no additional new titles. So we decided not to use that, because food gleaning is mainly related to food production, but also we didn't miss anything. Yeah. So what I meant is the reviewers pay more attention when they assess the quality of your review. They assess the quality of your search terms, not the hit. Yeah. So in terms of managing the whole capturing, and that's what I would recommend, using a ref. So this is another example from the robot paper. So search results obtained from each database. You can see it's, the number itself may not be that important. So we used EBSCOhost, we used Emerald, Science Director, Wiley, etc. So you can see the numbers very different. But sometimes you can see there is a need for you to make adjustment. I wanted to say, if you use Science Direct, nowadays, Science Direct only allow a combination of 8 booleans. So if your search string is that long, then that won't, it will not search. But when we used it at that time, we were still able to use the expert search. They've lost that function now. And also some, AgEcon and EconLit, and so their search may be different. Now for that one, as you can see, we made the adjustment. We decided not to use the agricultural, the crop field. The reason for that is, one is we knew that the number won't be huge. So therefore, there is no need to actually further restrict. By not restricting using the crops, we only got 200 articles anyway. So make it easier, yeah. So there are things, but as long as you are transparent and you are very clear about what you did and what the variations are, then that's fine. So summary overall is about a trade-off. So, when you design your search string, make sure you try to think about alternatives as much as possible. So that is the importance of synonyms, the alternative phrases, and think about the time and resources you have got. So you need to make some decisions, trade-off decisions, and form your search string from the key elements. Think about your population and your outcome or the intervention, and using those to guide you as well. Okay, so make sure that you are able to demonstrate the transparency of your search. That is the key. And once you've done that, the next part is about screening. So you can do screening by title. We tend to do screening by title, abstract together, and then by full text. And you need to have very clear selection criteria. So inclusion criteria could be based on your topic, could also be based on your study context. For example, country. So you may decide you are going to focus on studies in Southeast Asia, or in Asia only, or all over the world. So depending. So therefore, that's the kind of a process that you have to record. Now this is a generic information. I really like the next one and this one, and I would recommend you to consider using this diagram. Actually, we haven't used it, but for the future, I would like to consider this. This one looked at previous reviews for, so as I said, nowadays, there are so many systematic reviews already conducted. So it's actually better for you to, first of all, look at what systematic reviews have been done, and then you can incorporate their findings in your final review findings. So that is one body. And then from their systematic reviews, you can actually learn about the search terms, as well, develop your search terms based on other people's reviews, and then of course add more. And then clearly document your search outcomes. So how many titles, how many duplicates, etc. And then how many you excluded at each stage. And then there is another element of the body of literature will not come out of your search, because they may come from, for example, OECD, World Bank, FAO, and then those search strings you developed for academic databases may not apply. For example, for us, we actually, for the food waste, we only use the food waste. That, we just use that in the FAO, and a food waste and food loss. And that helped us to identify all the articles we needed from there. So you could simplify your search string, but you need to have a look at those. Another one is citation. So you could look at, who have cited the articles, and also look at the citations of the articles you have already included. So that may help you sometimes identify articles you have not searched up. So that may also help you to make an adjustment on your search string by reading the citations, the references of the articles. So in the end, you come up with this very comprehensive diagram to show the full process of your search and the screening process. So that leads to your final selection of articles. So data extraction and coding, as you can see, again, articulate that very clearly in your protocol is the key and to help you to understand. And data extraction for quantitative data is normally intervention and the comparator. Normally you need both if you wanted to do meta-analysis. If you don't have comparator, you only have intervention, you still capture them. I will show you for our rubber paper, sometimes we have comparator, sometimes we don't. So that's one. And so that means why we only had 16 articles or something like that, or 12 articles. But then for some articles, you just don't have comparator at all. And then you can only do narrative synthesis. For example, for our first paper on the robots, we could not do any comparison. Okay, so for that reason, so I will show you here this one. This one we actually captured intervention. So this is rubber intercropped with bamboo, rubber intercropped with ironwood, and then they have got outcomes for those intercropping systems, and also they have got outcomes for the monoculture rubber. So for that reason, so we were able to capture the data and calculate. This is a calculated percentages. So you use the outcome of this integrated system minus monoculture outcome, and then divided by monoculture, then you get the percentage of the increase. Yeah, so that is how we got it. But then in order to know the differences, because there are variations, it is really important. So this is where I wanted to emphasize. Sometimes there are some critical comments about systematic review. They will say systematic review tend to be heavy on the process, but light on the outcome. That means light on the critical review. And we actually avoided that. If you read the 3 papers, all 3 papers of our reviews are very heavy in terms of a critical review. We captured the data, we did a proper review, and whether it's narrative synthesis or just mapping, even just mapping, we did a really critical mapping rather than just normal descriptive mapping. So if you have time, do have a look at the 3 papers, you will see we tried to avoid that. But sometimes it's not even possible for you to calculate that differences. So we just got this one. This is the first paper about robots. So we only had positive or, positive for what, so that is the only thing you could do. They are just so, some articles are very, very inconsistent, and sometimes they are very light, because very often when they do this kind of economic studies, economics was only a side field, and because it is more about engineers, so engineers did the engineering trials, and so economic side was just something that they thought about, but they were not economists. So therefore, they wouldn't do a full economic assessment. So that is why it was really difficult for that one. So basically, that's everything for the systematic review, the process. And here are the resources I would recommend. EpiReviewer is a really good software, is online, and we used that for the food waste paper, the robots, and also the agri-forestry. So all 3 papers published, we actually use the EpiReviewer. Currently, I'm actually using another one called Distiller SR. I have to say, Distiller SR is very good in terms of the AI, but I know that EpiReviewer is actually actively developing their AI. But the reason I recommend the EpiReviewer is because it's much, much cheaper. That's one. But another very, very important criteria for me is the ability to keep your review forever. So your review has completed and your account has become deactivated. In terms, that means you can't make any changes, but you can generate reports forever. Whilst the distiller SR, once you finish, they deactivate, you can't access your account anymore. So, and it's very expensive. Yeah, but for us, we got the money for now to do that one, and we want to finish. And then once we finish, we are going to export everything from distiller SR so that we don't lose anything. But it has saved us time. You know, the AI has really saved us a lot of time. So, and then guidelines and the reporting templates, and that's the one that I showed you, and other review terms and the guidance. And then these are the books and the papers. This paper about the blind man and elephant metaphor, I quite like that one. And so these are the two books, which again, I think they are very good. Yeah, lots of resources online. So any questions?
Yes. Any question? Yeah, we still have time. If you want to ask the Dr. Iona, please feel free to ask her. Maybe you just feel, oh, what's that we have to do? What do you think, Dr. Krisadapan? What we will have to do? Okay, what is different between the intervention and comparator in meta-analysis?
Okay, in meta-analysis, you really, so comparator, for example, let's go back to this one. So comparator is the monoculture rubber. Intervention is the rubber intercropped with bamboo or rubber intercropped with ironwood and eaglewood. Another one is rubber intercropped with ironwood and champagne. So those are the interventions, and this is the comparator. So when in the meta-analysis, you have to record the, if they say economic outcomes, you need to have the economic outcome for monoculture rubber, also economic outcomes for this one, intercropped with bamboo, intercropped with ironwood and eaglewood, etc. The reason we could not do the meta-analysis was because the studies didn't give us the sample size for monoculture rubber only, for example, and for each intervention. It gives you the rubber planting density, discount rate, and intercrop density, tapping starting, you know, whether it starts from 7.2 or 6.6, but it didn't give us the plot size. Didn't say plot size of monoculture rubber and how many farms, how many plots were monoculture, how many plots were bamboo intercropped with rubber. Because that's what I said earlier, you need to have a mean, standard deviation, and the sample size for each study. So the study 1, study 2, this means it may mean from the same paper, for example. So this is study 1, 2, and 3, 4. We may have study 1, which is rubber intercropped with what was the one? Ironwood, and compared with rubber with compared with monoculture. Another one is rubber intercropped with ironwood compared with monoculture. Yeah, so that means in one paper there are 2 studies compared with the comparator. So that's that, but both needs to have sample size. So you see the sample size and deviation would be different. So if you don't have that, then you can't do the meta-analysis. So for that reason, we did our paper in this way, is a kind of compromised synthesis. Any other questions? You know, I want to say, for example, this paper doesn't even have a comparator. You know, they didn't, you know, they just said it is more, but they didn't really say how much more, yeah, how much higher, or if they say low is how much lower. They didn't do that. So for that reason, in the end, we decided just to use positive and negative, but they all recorded more in a way.
Hi, Iona.
Yeah.
After recording the review result, what method of analysis you usually use for discussion?
A method of analysis. Okay, so it would be better if I share with you the papers, then you will be able to see. So this one is the food waste paper. So this is a mapping. So as you can see, the mapping, what we did was to, first of all, you have to do a descriptive presentation. So to show the body of literature. So this basically shows the articles captured by publication, and you can see there is a peak in 2016 and 17, which we know why, but also there are different types of papers, as you can see. So we actually mapped out academic peer reviews, organizational report, trade publications, etc. So therefore you can actually, so that's a very basic level. Is about what we call it descriptive mapping of the research body, of the body of the research. The same thing we did for the agroforestry paper. So we also did, you see here, so results, the profile of studies selected. So again, this part just really described the body. Then, so those are the papers that we selected, and then we showed how many farming systems that we found from those papers. And at this stage, it's just the mapping. So again, we only showed positive and negative outcomes. So whether they are more or less than the, so you can see in general, if you just by looking at this one, it gives you an overview of intercropping system overall may be better than monoculture. Yeah, and then you can see which type. So this is a kind of descriptive, very descriptive. And the same thing for the other, we did that as well, characteristics of the full text studies analyzed. So you do that kind of description. Once you've done that description, the next part is actually to do the synthesis. So you look at the actual economic benefits. And so this paper showed economic benefits. We basically just looked at each paper in detail and assessed their outcomes. And so you can see that's how we tried to assess, and then you know, where possible, we try to group them as much as we could using the methods. For example, what methods they have used to look at the economic outcomes. Here is partial budget or scenario planning, etc. And did they have economic details? Yes or no? You can see. So did they use the depreciation? And so we went through all of them, and then we went to that kind of very much narrative, but actually also critical synthesis, analysis of the outcomes. So this is why I said earlier that our papers are different from some papers tend to stop at this stage, characteristics, and then finished. So we actually, as you can see, spent, like half of our article in the actual narrative synthesis and the critical analysis. So this is a half of this paper, the same for this one. So here, so we got the results, we got the search results and characteristics, which is what I showed you. But then after that, there's from here onwards, so we did a lot more on the critical analysis in terms of the synthesis, looking at the countries. So this is about descriptive again. So this one actually had more description, but then grouping, showing the differences at stages or hierarchy of the food waste. And then another hierarchy, different thematic. So this is more or less like a thematic synthesis of the food waste management. And then you can see that we did a lot more, and then discussion and synthesizing, theorizing. So we actually did a theorization, theory building out of that. So that's that one. And then the third paper, so this is the agroforestry, I said. So we did this profiling. After the profiling, then we did very detailed economic outcome comparison. We actually assessed the risk of bias, and so looked at the papers, look at why it was not possible to do meta-analysis, you can see from here, but also the risk of bias assessment, we got like low, moderate, high. So that means that one, if you say this one has got increase 11.9%, but because we're not doing the meta-analysis, so therefore we don't have to do the weighting. But if you do meta-analysis, this has got a high risk of bias, then you may give a weighting, say, although this one increased by 11.9%, but if the weighting is only 0.1, then that's not a, the total contribution to the total effect wouldn't be that high. Okay, so that's what I meant. So again, so you can see that we did that. And once we did the calculation, and this is our calculation, but then as you can see, the narrative synthesis, we actually did lots of the critical. Now, the critical narrative synthesis is about why do you do that? The reason you do this is you need to be able to explain, you need to help the readers to understand what makes that difference, right? Because you can see there are some studies showing positive outcomes and some showing negative outcomes. What helps us to explain the difference? Why some are still negative, why some are positive, why some, so therefore after this systematic review, you would say, in what situation they are negative, in what situation they are positive, and then only that, if you are able to articulate that very clearly, then that will be useful for the farmers, for the policymakers. Does that make sense?
Yes. This means why finally we got only about 14 articles for the narrative synthesis, because we want to deep understand and you have to critical of each article. That's it.
Yeah. So you can see all of this are the critical analysis to help us to understand what makes the difference. Any other questions?
Any question? How about Dr. Bong? I found you here. Are you there, Dr. Siwapong? Maybe he just popped up. Any other question? And thank you, the Kun Bella, that's for your question on this. Any question? Please feel free to ask Iona. Thank you, Kun Chanakan. Yeah. And for the, if you want to, it's not like normal because today Iona is really clear, explain about systematic review. But if you want to know in the practical, that tomorrow you will have the seminar about how to use the systematic review in Thai. And it's just not like I will share, let me say, I will share my experience to you, and I will demonstration how to use EPPI. If you want to continue to listen and maybe discuss with me and the participant, please feel free to join. I put the link into the chat. And also, if you have any comment, could you please help us to fill the seminar evaluation form as I put in the chat? Just set a couple questions like the knowledge before you attend this seminar and the knowledge after you attend seminar and how useful was this seminar. How about Dr. Krisadapan? Do you have anything to say? Sorry, you. Okay.
Yes, I mute again. Yes, I want to say thank you to Dr. Iona to give us the knowledge about the systematic review. I have some more idea about the research involved to the systematic review. Maybe tomorrow I will discuss with Dr. Niticha about this. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Iona.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this. It was really my great pleasure to talk to you about my experience of doing systematic review. And I personally found it a really useful tool. So for any, even if I don't do systematic review, but the methods of systematic review will always help me. So whenever I get to a new field, I wanted to know about that. About that field, then automatically I do searches using the way that I tend to use for systematic review in order for me to really have a very, very quick overview of the body of the field. So it is a very useful tool in that way even. So good luck with your research. And
Iona, could you give us a reward for the 15 people left? Could you please share your PowerPoint slide into the chat?
Yes, it is. Yes, just a second. Let me just stop share.
And also now we have the Dr. Sopon. Dr. Sopon, you are here?
Hello.
Yes.
My old friend.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Iona.
He is here from the beginning.
Oh,
yes. Very nice to meet you again.
Nice meeting you too. Yeah. Great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Still not get the COVID yet.
Oh. You are very lucky.
Still free from COVID, yes.
Yeah, that's great. You are lucky. I think everybody has to stay safe.
And how about Dr. Sorry, Dr. Sopon, please. Yeah.
No, just are you, get COVID yet?
Not yet.
That's very good. That's very good for you too, Dr. Iona.
Do you want to stop the recording, Niticha?
Okay,
Yeah. Sorry about that.